There are 35 people on death row in the state of Mississippi. Devin Bennett, 20 years on death row. In February 2003, Bennett was found guilty of capital murder in Rankin County and given the death penalty for felony child abuse, which resulted in the death of his 2-month-old son, Brandon Bennett. In June 2000, Devin Bennett and Yolanda Lewis had a son, Brandon Allen Bennett. Bennett brought Brandon to River Oaks Hospital 2 months later on August 25, 2000 at 8:45 a.m. Nurse Colette Moreland removed Brandon from Bennett, observing that the infant was pale, cold, and not breathing. According to medical documents, Brandon was asystolic, which means he didn't have a pulse or a heartbeat. When the hospital team questioned Bennett about what had happened to Brandon, he replied that he woke up at 4 that morning and saw that Brandon had seemingly slipped from his car seat onto the floor. This was the first of Bennett's at least 7 accounts of what transpired before Brandon passed away. Baby Brandon had multiple bruises and injuries that led the authorities to believe he had shaken baby syndrome, and this was ultimately his cause of death. James Billiot, 41 years on death row. Wallace Kroll Jr., Billiot's stepfather, was found dead from a bludgeoning on Thanksgiving Day on November 26, 1981, in his home. Both Billiot's mother and stepsister, who was just 14 years old, were discovered dead in the house as well. George Hebler, Chris Lee, and 12-year-old Stephen Kroll discovered the bodies. On the morning of November 26, 1981, while returning from Picayune, Mississippi, young Kroll, Lee, and Hebler noticed James Billiot driving Wallace Kroll's vehicle. They quickly proceeded to Kroll's Leetown community house after growing suspicious. They discovered the victims there, along with an 8-pound sledgehammer that was laying close to the bodies. They also discovered Wallace Kroll's wallet and a few other papers lying on the floor. James Billiot allegedly threatened to kill his mother and stepfather on November 7, 1981, while the two were at the Living Waters Church of God in Picayune, Mississippi, according to Brian Strickland, a native of Leetown and Billiot's acquaintance. In his deposition, Leo Jones stated that he encountered Billiot hitchhiking on November 26 and offered to drive him from Picayune to the Leetown neighborhood. James Billiot insisted on being let out by a field next to the Kroll residence in Leetown instead of in front of the house. Following the discovery of the bodies, Louisiana and Mississippi issued an all-points notice, and 2 days later, the New Orleans Police Department detained Billiot. He was extradited to Mississippi following a hearing. Xavier Brown, 21 years on death row. Felicia Newell was discovered dead in her car outside her Hattiesburg, Mississippi apartment building on February 26, 1998. James Bigler and Susan Petrush, 2 witnesses, said they heard a gunshot and saw a black man wearing gloves leave Newell's car. Bigler reported that the man entered the passenger side of what looked to be a blue Cutlass, while holding something hidden in his right hand. Bigler saw another guy wearing white gloves in the driver's seat after the man got inside the vehicle. The car drove away from the crime site. Petrush said that she had contacted both the police and the answering service for her apartment building. Anthony Sims, Newell's ex-husband, was the main suspect in her murder since he had a history of violently abusing her. In March 1998, Newell was also supposed to testify against Sims about a charge related to concealed weapons. "There's a contract out on you," Sims threatened in a voicemail that he left for Newell before the murder. The transmission also records the sound of another person whispering remarks to Sims, who subsequently relayed them to Newell. Sims was discovered by the authorities dead in a motel in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 2 days after taking an overdose of prescription drugs. The police had no leads after Sims' death was declared to be a suicide. It seemed as though the Newell murder case was over. A man named Donald Crosby informed Newell's friend many months later that Tony Brown, a man, had murdered her. A man called Xavier Brown had boasted to Crosby about killing Newell, and he reported this to the police. According to Crosby, Sims had paid Brown to kill Newell, and Sims had killed himself to avoid having to pay Brown's obligation. Then, on June 10, 1999, more than a year after the murder, a guy by the name of Corey Johnson, who was engaged to Brown's sister, came forward and admitted to the police that he had traveled from Laurel to Hattiesburg with Brown. Johnson said to the authorities that he had witnessed Brown use a 9mm handgun to murder Newell. Additionally, he said that Brown had threatened to kill him if he revealed what he had seen. The state obtained an indictment for Brown based on the evidence gathered from Crosby, Johnson, and two of Newell's eyewitnesses' neighbors, Susan Petrush and James Bigler. Anthony Carr, 33 years on death row. Robert Simon, 33 years on death row. Carl Parker, his wife Bobby Jo, and their two children, Gregory, age 12, and Charlotte, age 9, left the Riverside Baptist Church in Clarksdale on Friday, February 2, 1990, and headed back to their house on Highway 322 in rural Quitman County, which was about 15 miles away from Clarksdale. The Parkers were last observed that evening between 8:45 and 9:15 p.m., leaving the church. While traveling east on the highway at approximately 11 p.m., Billy King noticed a fire at the Parker residence. Mr. King attempted to enter the house through the unlocked carport door, but the fire forced him to retreat. In order to get assistance, Mr. King drove to the closest neighbor's house after leaving the Parkers' home. On his route to the neighbor's house, King did not pass any cars. However, when he turned around at the neighbor's front door to face the Parkers' residence, he noticed two cars leaving the Parkers' home and heading west. Joe McCullough was traveling on the highway east as King was at the neighbor's house attempting to get assistance. In his deposition, McCullough said there were two cars that were rapidly approaching Clarksdale while tailgating. He recognized the Silverado pickup truck as the lead car. Between 11 and 11:20 p.m., Lambert Volunteer Fire Department fireman Jerry Wages received a call reporting the Parkers' fire. He located Carl Parker's body and then returned inside the residence and retrieved Gregory and Charlotte's bodies. Wages remembered that Carl and Gregory had their wrists tied behind their backs, and they were shackled at the ankles and feet. Charlotte's wrist still had a piece of binding on it. Beneath her dress, Charlotte had no clothes on below her waist. Wages reported that she also had a cut on her hip. After the fire was eventually put out, Bobby Jo Parker's body was found in the early hours of the morning. Her body, which had been severely charred, was discovered in the southwest corner of the home. On February 2nd of 1990, Martha Simon, the wife of Robert Simon, had left Memphis and gone to Clarksdale to visit her mother. She added that for the last 3 weeks, Carr had been residing in their Memphis apartment with her and Robert. On February 3rd, 1990, at around 12:30 a.m., Martha noticed Carr strolling down the street while she was in her car. Carr inquired as to whether Martha had seen Robert. In response, Martha said she believed Carr and Robert had been together. Carr was asked how he arrived in town. In response, he said he was driving a truck and gestured in the general direction of the Parker truck's later discovery. Carr informed her that the vehicle had stuff in it and that he parked it on the 9th Street. He mentioned to Martha that he had some cash as well. He informed her where he had hidden some coveralls in a dumpster and that he had left the truck's keys beside the railroad lines. A sealed dumpster close to Martha Simon's mother-in-law's Clarksdale home yielded a pair of coveralls and a pair of work gloves, thanks to information provided by Simon to Coahoma County Sheriff Andrew Thompson Jr. The coveralls had a smoky odor and were damp. Dean Parker, Carl Parker's son, recognized the gloves as being the identical kind he had given his father. The shotgun that was discovered in the truck had Carr's fingerprint on it. 2 arrest warrants were issued in Marks, Mississippi on February 3, 1990. That day, at approximately 3:30 p.m., Anthony Carr and Robert Simon Jr. were taken into custody in Clarksdale. Pathologist Dr. Stephen Hain provided testimony regarding the circumstances behind each Parker family member's death. Following 2 gunshot wounds, Carl and Gregory both passed away. Bobby Jo was shot to death, her body completely charred beyond recognition, and just 1 bullet was found. Young Charlotte was shot 3 times, and she eventually died from smoke inhalation. She had also been essayed, and ultimately that was the reason Carr decided to murder the entire family and burn the house down to make sure no evidence against him would be found. Caleb Carothers, 12 years on death row. The state of Mississippi sentenced Caleb Carothers to death for the killings of 2 brothers. Carothers was meeting them for a narcotics deal when something went wrong, according to court filings. After pursuing one of the victims inside his house, Caleb shot both the guy and his sibling, murdering Frank Clark and Taylor Clark. A third man who had survived his wounds was also shot by Caleb. Lisa Jo Chamberlain, 17 years on death row. Chamberlain and her boyfriend Roger Lee Gillett were charged with the murders of Linda Heinzelman and Heinzelman's boyfriend Vernon Hullett. The criminal couple was dealing drugs, and fearing Linda would turn them in to the police, they decided to get rid of her. Her partner Vernon, who was actually Gillett's cousin, was at the house as well. They used a hammer to beat him to death, causing the hammer's metal handle to bend and cave in his skull. Linda passed away after 2 days of agony. Her throat was cut, and a plastic bag was pulled over her head to suffocate her. She was also beaten, stabbed, and essayed. After all that, she was suffocated by a pillow, which caused her death. Gillett and Chamberlain dismembered the corpses with a hacksaw, placed them in a chest freezer that had been put into Hullett's vehicle, and then drove 15 hours, or over 1,000 miles, while bringing 7 bags of evidence that they dumped at the Russell County landfill. Gillett and Chamberlain towed the truck into a shed at the Waldo farm, owned by Gillett's family. According to court filings, at that point they plugged in the freezer and sealed it with a roll of gray duct tape. As people witnessed Lisa Jo Chamberlain and Roger Gillett selling meth while driving around in the victim's car, they called the police, who opened an investigation and subsequently charged the two with murder. Ricky Chase, 33 years on death row. On August 14, 1989, an elderly couple named Doris and Elmer Hart were robbed at their house outside of Hazelhurst by Ricky Chase and Robert Washington. It was acknowledged that the two had physically overcome Mrs. Hart before robbing the house of a number of valuables, namely cash and firearms. Elmer Hart returned home during the robbery, and both Chase and Washington claimed that the other was the mastermind behind the scheme and that it was they who had shot and killed Hart. Washington testified against Chase after entering a guilty plea and being given a life sentence. Charles Ray Crawford, 29 years on death row. Crawford was detained in 1992 on charges of serious violence and essay. He was taken into custody on bond after being suspected of killing a young lady. He was given a 66-year prison term after being found guilty of essay in 1993. After being found guilty of murder in 1994, he received a death sentence. The death penalty was the only appropriate punishment, according to the prosecution. Pathologist Dr. Stephen Hain stated in his testimony that Christie had only had one chest stab wound. Christie sustained many abrasions to her lower limbs, right and left, along with skin scrapes on her back and buttocks. She also had abrasions on her wrist, contusions on her lips, and scrapes on her face and chest. Christie's wrist injuries made sense given that she was chained. According to Hain's testimony, the scrapes discovered on Christie's thigh and buttocks happened while she was still alive and were in line with injuries one may sustain during a fight-or-flight reaction. Additionally, he stated in his testimony that Christie's injuries were compatible with being dragged along a hard surface, possibly branches or twigs. The wounds also matched those sustained by someone trying to elude or resist being essayed. Instead of being pulled, Christie's face abrasions and lip contusion were consistent with her face being forced against a hard surface. Christie died as a result of a major stabbing wound to her left mid-chest that pierced her lung and heart and caused significant internal and external bleeding. Christie passed away in 1 to 2 minutes. David Dickerson, 11 years on death row. During the mid-1990s, David Dickerson and Paula Harrington were romantically involved and had a child named Courtney Dickerson. Dickerson, aside from unpleasant correspondence, didn't stay in touch with Paula or Courtney after their breakup. Later on, Paula wed Alan Hamilton. Besides Courtney, she had 2 other kids. Paula resided on land close to Wesson, Mississippi with her family. They shared a home with Robin Harrington, Paula's sister. In addition, a number of other family members resided on the land, including Linda Austin, an aunt who dwelt in a trailer behind Paula's home. Paula filed for a protective order against Dickerson in 2010 on the grounds that he was following her and Courtney, who was 16 at the time. She also claimed to have been stalked in a criminal affidavit. A hearing on the relevant criminal charges was scheduled for January 25, 2011, and the protection order was entered. Around 6:30 a.m. on January 25, 2011, Robin was standing outside Paula's house when she noticed a man on the land. Paula walked outside to look into it when she told her. Paula yelled at Robin to call 911 as soon as she heard a gunshot. According to Robin's testimony, Paula returned home covered in blood. with the man pursuing her and requesting the keys to a van. David Dickerson was the man that Robin identified. When Kayla Harrington, Paula's younger daughter, who was 13 at the time, heard from her aunt Robin that a man was outside the house, she was getting ready for school. According to Kayla's testimony, she heard screaming after Paula stepped outdoors, so she followed suit. Kayla observed a man playing around with a gun. After hearing 2 gunshots, she hurried back inside to retrieve her younger brother. They ran into the restroom and Kayla shut the door behind her. When Robin joined the kids in the restroom, Kayla called 911. When Kayla peeked out the window, she observed the man dousing the camper in gas before grabbing the gas can and taking off. Kayla stated in her testimony that she overheard Courtney, her sister, identify the man as David Dickerson. When Courtney's aunt Robin noticed the man outside, Courtney was also getting ready for school. According to Courtney's testimony, Paula stepped outside, and when she heard screams, everyone fled the house. She witnessed David Dickerson, her father, putting a gun to her mother's head. Dickerson struck Courtney in the face when she attempted to push him away from her mother. Courtney raced to her aunt Linda's trailer after Paula told her to go there. Paula arrived at the trailer shortly later, covered in blood. After letting her in, they secured the door. As soon as Dickerson kicked in the door, Linda pointed a gun at him. Dickerson threatened to shoot Courtney if she would not lay down her gun, pointing his own at her. Courtney and Linda left the trailer once Paula gave them the order to do so. According to Courtney's testimony, Dickerson was seen pouring gasoline all over Paula and the trailer as he was holding a gas can. Courtney ran back to Paula's house while Linda ran to a neighbor's house. Then Courtney noticed the trailer was on fire. While passing Paula's house in their car, Reverends Ken Hatchpet and Thomas McCormick witnessed the trailer blow up. They entered the driveway and sprinted in the direction of the burning trailer. The Reverends noticed a man standing close to the trailer. Under the trailer, they discovered Paula trapped, alive, and on fire. They stated in their testimony that she smelled like gasoline when they pulled her away. Despite the man's best efforts, Paula passed away before the police could come. She had first-degree burns, stab wounds to her neck and torso, and gunshot wounds to her head and back. Leslie Galloway, 13 years on death row. Galloway was convicted by the jury of essaying Shaquilia Anderson in December 2008. After severing her throat, he lit her ablaze and ran a car over her. It was the most graphic crime scene that an investigator had ever seen. The victim was a student at Harrison Central High School. A few days after her death, hunters in DeSoto National Forest found her body. According to expert witnesses, remnants of her body were discovered beneath Galloway's mother's Ford Taurus. Kelvin Jordan, 27 years on death row. On October 5, 1995, Jordan and Frontrell Edwards were found guilty and given the death penalty for the murders of Tony Roberts and his 2-year-old son, Cordera Bradley. Jordan and Edwards made a stop at Pachutazamoco gas station. After approaching the father and son, Roberts offered to drive the 2 men to a Heidelberg ball game. On October 8, 1995, Roberts' 1987 Nissan was discovered burning in a dirt pit close to Rose Hill. The bodies of Roberts and his son were discovered on Highway 11 next to the train tracks, 2 miles below the Barnett settlement. The infant had been shot once and the father multiple times. Authorities eventually found the rifle in a Jasper County pond. Richard Jordan, 25 years on death row. Jordan was found guilty on January 13, 1976, of kidnapping and murdering Edwina Marta in Harrison County. He was charged with extorting Marta's husband for a $25,000 ransom, dragging her to a North Harrison County forested area, and shooting her in the back of the head. He received 4 different death sentences. Jordan successfully contested his death sentence after the first 3 convictions. He was then retried and received another death sentence. Jason Lee Keller, 14 years on death row. In her convenience store in Biloxi, Mississippi, Keller robbed and killed Hat Nguyen. Keller could not recollect precisely how many times he had shot her, but he did know that he had shot her once or twice before she rushed out the door of the convenience store, and that he had followed her out the store holding the revolver. They went back inside after she promised to give him all of the cash there. Then Keller shot her once again. Stephen Michael Knox, 24 years on death row. In order to watch the kids of her niece, Guy Alice Spears Green, Ella Mae Spears was due to go from Liberty to Fayette, Mississippi on October 22, 1998. Green called Spears' son, Albert McKnight, who then got in touch with Amity County Sheriff Gene McClendon after Miss Spears did not show up in Fayette as planned. Then McClendon and McKnight headed to Spears' Liberty home. Spears wasn't there when they got there at about 2 p.m. The house's rear door to the garage was closed but unlocked. Her car was in the carport, her purse on a table inside the home. Dark streaks that seemed to be a blood trail heading to the back of Spears's car were found by McClendon on the carport floor. McClendon called the dealership where he bought the car from when he couldn't find the keys and got a duplicate key that opened the trunk. Spears's lifeless body was wrapped in a quilt inside. According to the autopsy findings, Spears's death was consistent with manual strangulation. Tong Lee, 21 years on death row. Following the beating and strangulation deaths of Min Hyu Thi Hyun and her two daughters, 10, then 15, and Thuy, then 11, Tong Lee and Gan Tran were charged with capital murder. While being held in detention, Gan Tran, the man who was thought to have carried out the real killings, committed suicide. After a trial, Lee received a death by lethal injection sentence. The state evidence at Lee's trial demonstrated that the two had gone to Huyn's house with the intention of robbing her. The kids, who were by themselves at home, let the two enter the apartment. Upon Huyn's return, she and the kids had been brutally assaulted, chained, and strangled to death. Lee and Tran tried using water and bleach to cleanse the area for hours. Along taking $1,300 in cash, the two also took a book bag filled with home goods. Willie Jerome Manning, 29 years on death row. Born on June 12, 1968, Willie Jerome Fly Manning is currently serving 2 death sentences in the Mississippi State Penitentiary in the United States for his conviction of a double murder, the Steckler-Miller murders. In the past, he was found guilty and given the death penalty for the unconnected double killings known as the Jimerson-Jordan murders. However, the state Supreme Court reversed this decision and mandated a new trial. The Death Penalty Information Center designated him as a 2015 death row exoneree for this case, when the charges against him for the Jimerson-Jordan murders were dismissed. Prosecutors claimed that on December 11, 1992, 2 Mississippi State University students, John Steckler, then 19 years old, and Tiffany Miller, then 22 years old, were pushed into Miller's car from the street in front of Steckler's fraternity home. An hour or so later, a driver discovered Steckler shot in the back of the head and left for dead by the side of the road just outside of Starkville after Miller's Toyota MR2 ran him over. Officers on the scene discovered Miller's body in the woods. She had been shot once in the mouth and once in the forehead. Based on the evidence, it appeared that she had experienced SA as well. Steckler passed away soon after. Miller's vehicle was discovered close to the MSU campus in the morning. John Stephen Steckler was a second-year Forest Resources major. In addition to being a committed Catholic who served in Mexico as a missionary, he was an athlete who played football for Cathedral High School. He enjoyed being in nature and going hunting. Pamela Tiffany Miller was a Madison, Mississippi native in her 3rd year of nursing school. She had taken a year off. John Wise, a fraternity buddy of Steckler's, discovered his car had been broken into the morning of the killings. The 2 students, according to the prosecution, stopped the break-in. A token from a gas station was among the things taken. The murder scene had a token that was strikingly similar. In addition, a portable CD player that was tracked down by its serial number from Wise to a pawn shop in Jackson was taken, as was a black leather bomber jacket that was eventually found and recovered from Manning's girlfriend, who testified during the trial that Manning had given it to her. Galen Hall, the pawner, stated in court that he got it from Manning. Manning had recently been granted parole and had a criminal record that included theft and other offenses. He had been found guilty of grand larceny on September 5, 1991, and burglary of a residence on April 20, 1992. Evidence presented during Manning's prosecution revealed that he both owned and attempted to sell goods taken during the Wise break-in. In addition to attesting to Manning's ownership of the pilfered goods, Manning's girlfriend also revealed that the man had been practicing target shooting with a tree. Slugs found in the tree were shot from the same gun that killed Steckler and Miller, according to an FBI firearms expert. Ginger Wallace testified that she saw Manning with a watch resembling Steckler's, a gold glass ring, and wearing a leather jacket. Eric Moffett, 30 years on death row. In the early hours of December 31, 1994, Felicia Griffin was essayed, beaten, and killed. Felicia shared a home in Jackson with her mother Penny Griffin, her two sisters, and Moffett. Moffett was Penny's boyfriend. Moffett, Penny, and the three girls were home on December 30, 1994. Around 9:45 p.m., Moffett departed the house as Penny was getting ready for work. Penny anticipated that Florence Moffett Powell, Moffett's mother, would arrive shortly to drive her to work. Before departing, Penny made sure the kids were okay and secured the door and burglar's bars. Powell stopped by Penny's house, picked her up at the gas station, and drove her to work. Sherita stated in her deposition that she had gone with Powell and had seen him go into the residence in search of Penny. Powell passed away before the trial, therefore she did not testify. Evidence was presented to the jury indicating that Moffett went back to the residence a few hours later, dragged Felicia into the bedroom, abused her, and viciously essayed her by using his fingers and fist. Felicia was just 5 years old. Clyde Wendell Smith, 30 years on death row. A grand jury in Leflore County indicted Clyde Wendell Smith and his younger brother Jerome Pete Smith for the November 7, 1992, robbery murder of Johnny B. Smith, the owner of Sidon Package Store. The jury found Clyde and Jerome guilty of capital murder, and they were both given the death penalty. Roger Thorson, 35 years on death row. In Harrison County, Thorson was given a death sentence in 1988 for killing his girlfriend, Gloria McKinney, while committing abduction. Roger Eric Thorson went to Edgewater Mall in Biloxi on March 4, 1987, with the intention of having a conversation with Gloria McKinney, his former fiancée. He wanted to apologize to Gloria face-to-face because he was concerned that Patricia Cook, his neighbor and lover, might have said something upsetting to her. Thorson's friend Reggie Brazil informed him that McKinney wouldn't be leaving Morrison's until 4 p.m. when he arrived at the mall. Thorson approached McKinney's car as she was leaving the mall, said he was there to apologize, and asked if she would give him a ride to the Cedar Lake exit. She agreed. Thorson begged McKinney to continue driving toward his house when they got to the exit because he still needed to talk to her. Thorson then threatened McKinney with a knife. Until he pointed her in the direction of a rural road, McKinney kept driving at knife point. Then Thorson gave McKinney the command to undress completely and turn so that her back was to him. Then he placed a gun that he just bought from Paul Quinn, his neighbor, on the dashboard. Thorson took a piece of rope out of his jacket pocket and tied McKinney's hands behind her back once she had undressed. Then he bound her neck with her brassiere while she was still holding it in her mouth, and Thorson essayed Gloria McKinney. Thorson didn't want his fingerprints to be on anything after he essayed her, so he used the towel he had discovered in McKinney's car to wipe down everything he believed he might have touched. When Thorson asked McKinney if she would tell anyone about what had happened, she responded with a shake of her head that she wouldn't. Thorson did not trust her. He cut her throat with the knife. He exited her vehicle and took out Gloria's wallet, a plastic power steering fluid bottle, and the blue jacket he had given her. He wanted a picture of Gloria, so he took her driver's license out of the wallet. To give the impression that Gloria had been injured by someone else, he threw the wallet and bottle into the woods. Gloria was sitting in the car at this point, her neck wound still bleeding. She managed to exit her vehicle. Thorson shot her in the head as he walked back to the car after she cried out for help. After running home, he went to his wardrobe and hung Gloria's coat. Thorson strolled up to Patricia Cook's trailer, which was right behind him, and used bleach to clean the knife and his hands of any remaining gunpowder residue. Then he returned to his trailer, buried the knife, revolver, shells, and Gloria's watch in a vacant lot close to it, and wrapped Gloria's jacket around them. Thorson was arrested for the murder of Gloria McKinney on March 8, 1987. Justin Underwood, 28 years on death row. When Lindsay Harris got home from work on February 15, 1994, he discovered that his wife Virginia had vanished. The following day, Her body was discovered in a forested location about a mile and a half from her house. 4 shots had been fired at her. On the morning of the crime, Underwood's car was spotted close to the Harris residence, according to testimony given during the trial. Underwood's uncle testified that he had retrieved his .32 caliber revolver from Underwood's car after it had been reported stolen before the murder. The firearms expert from the state attested to the fact that the bullets taken from Virginia Harris's body came from that particular weapon. Underwood acknowledged during questioning that he had used the pistol he had taken from his uncle to shoot Mrs. Harris. He claimed that Mrs. Harris had requested him to murder her, claiming that she had contracted AIDS from her husband. During the trial, both the state and the defendant agreed that Mrs. Harris never had HIV or AIDS. After finding Underwood guilty, the jury decided that he should be executed. Alan Dale Walker, 32 years on death row. He was convicted of kidnapping, essaying, and drowning 19-year-old Konya Edwards on September 8, 1990. An accomplice said that Walker coerced the woman into having sex at Crystal Lake in Harrison County. The victim had met Walker at a bar. The accomplice said he and Walker held Edwards under the water until she died. Derek Demo Walker, 20 years on death row. The state of Mississippi sentenced Walker to death for the murder of his next-door neighbor. Walker killed the victim with a knife, then set the house on fire to hide his crime, according to court filings. Derek Walker was allegedly robbing the house when Charles Richardson, the victim, startled him. Tony Terrell Clark, 5 years on death row. Fad Saed and his 13-year-old son Muhammad were co-workers at Fad's convenience store in Canton, Mississippi, on the evening of October 27, 2014. At the age of 13, Fad left Yemen in the 1990s to relocate to the United States. He grew up in California, working at convenience stores with his parents. After moving to Canton, he kept working there until he could afford to establish his own business, which he called Fat Boy. While Fad's wife and 2 daughters resided in Yemen, Fad and Muhammad lived at the back of the shop. At around 10:10 p.m. on that particular evening, Fad was seated right behind Muhammad at the cash register, talking on FaceTime with Muhammad's mother in Yemen. Just as Muhammad was wrapping up a deal with Marcus Sanderson, a frequent customer, Clark and his nephew Teonta Clark walked into the store. No other customers were in the store at the time. Clark approached Muhammad silently and fired a single, point-blank bullet to the left side of his head, instantly taking his life. The gun jammed when Clark tried to shoot Fad. Immediately, Clark moved around the service counter, racked the slide of the revolver, and aimed it at Fad's head. Fad was able to dislodge the gun. After inflicting Fad a gunshot wound to the stomach, Clark commanded him to give it up. Clark approached the cash register, climbing on top of Muhammad's body and snatching his cell phone with his downward reach. After asking Teonta where Fad had stashed the store's cash, Clark made an effort to access the register. A car pulled up to the business at that precise moment. After Teonta informed Clark, the 2 men took Muhammad's cell phone and exited the store. Once the 2 women got out of the car and entered the business, they discovered that Muhammad's body was laying on the ground. One of the women made the quick decision to call 911. Authorities identified Teonta and Clark as suspects right away. As he was exiting the store, Anderson, who knew both Clark and Teonta, noticed the 2 men entering. When Anderson heard the first shot, he fled from where he was standing outside the business, where Clark had just shot Muhammad. Later that evening, he went to the police station to provide an official statement. Fad knew Teonta and Clark as well. Clark had occasionally shopped at the business, and Teonta was a regular customer. At the trial, Fad named Clark as the gunman. Authorities obtained footage from the store's 7 security cameras, which provided the most incriminating evidence in the case. The footage showed Clark and Teonta entering the store and Clark killing Muhammad. Additionally, Clark was seen on the camera snatching Muhammad's phone behind the counter and attempting to open the cash register. 1 week later, in Dallas, Texas, Clark and Teonta were taken into custody. Alberto Julio Garcia, 6 years on death row. Garcia was sentenced to death for the murder of 5-year-old Janaea Thompson. On July 16, 2014, Janaea vanished from her home in Gulfport, Mississippi. Her mother and other family members started looking for Janaea at their apartment complex and quickly moved to the neighborhood. After Janaea vanished, her relatives came to Garcia's house to ask whether he had seen the young child. He told the family he had not seen her, looking them in their eyes. Garcia was among the several neighbors who joined the search. The day after she vanished, police discovered her body hanging by her neck in a rat-infested trailer, with a pair of socks dangling from a window crank 50 feet from her house. In order to spare his mother from hearing about and seeing the evidence used against him in court, Garcia admitted to the killing. Willie Corey Godbolt, 3 years on death row. 8 individuals were killed in May 2017, and Willie Corey Godbolt was found guilty. Godbolt had an argument with his ex-wife regarding their children on May 27, 2017, when he went to his in-law's house. He murdered a deputy, his mother-in-law, and 2 others. 2 young people were slain in a second residence early the following day, and the married couple was slain in a third house. Godbolt's stepmother killed his father with a gun when he was just 17 years old, which left him with enormous anger and resentment directed especially towards women. Blade Grayson, 26 years on death row. In 1997, Grayson was found guilty of capital murder for the stabbing death of 78-year-old Minnie Smith during a house invasion in George County, South Mississippi, the year before. Her body was found by her son-in-law on May 5, 1996. Marlon Howell, 22 years on death row. In 2001, Howell was found guilty of capital murder and given the death penalty for the robbery-related death of David Purnell, 61 years old. After being flagged down on a New Albany city street, Purnell, a retired postman who delivered the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal, was shot in his car. James Cobb Hutto, 10 years on death row. The state of Mississippi sentenced him to death for the killing of an elderly woman. Court records state that Ethel Simpson, an 81-year-old victim, was murdered after James Hutto became friends with her and they went to a casino. Simpson suffered serious head and neck injuries before passing away. Her blood was subsequently found on Hutto's Nike flip-flops from the night she vanished, according to forensic examinations. Terry Pitchford, 17 years on death row. The state of Mississippi sentenced Pitchford to death for a robbery murder. Reuben Britt, the owner of the store, was killed by Terry Pitchford and a companion during a heist, according to court filings. When Walter Davis and his son went into the Crossroads grocery early on November 7, 2004, they found Reuben Britt, the store owner, dead inside. Stephen Powers, 23 years on death row. Through a mutual friend, Eddie Barnes, Elizabeth Lafferty was introduced to Powers and his nephew, Junior or J. Otis Jr., on the afternoon of June 13, 1998. The 4 of them made the decision to grill and sip beer at Lafferty's house. Later, Powers and Lafferty were left alone when Otis and Barnes departed from the Lafferty residence. In the corridor, Lafferty's body was found at about 1 in the morning. She had been shot 5 times. Once in the temple, once under the chin, and 3 times at point-blank range in the back of the skull. Elizabeth was 27 years old, and Powers was 29. Timothy Ronk, 13 years on death row. In 2010, Ronk was found guilty of killing Michelle Crate, a 37-year-old. According to court documents, Crate's charred and stabbed body was discovered by rescue personnel in a bedroom of her Flaming home on August 26, 2008. Ronk argued with Crate, according to the prosecution, as he was leaving her for a different lady in Florida. When he stabbed Crate, he claimed to have done it in self-defense. At Crate's autopsy, it was discovered that she had sustained many backstab wounds in addition to severe burns that had eaten through her flesh to the bone. The lining of Crate's mouth, tongue, larynx, and windpipe were burned and blistered, and her blood contained a significant amount of carbon monoxide. Crate was breathing and alive when the fire happened. According to forensic pathologist Dr. Paul McGarry, Crate most certainly died as a result of the stab wounds, since, in the absence of medical attention, the wounds would have killed her in minutes or hours. But he also pointed out that Crate was rendered unable to flee the flames due to her stab wounds. Joseph Patrick Brown, 29 years on death row. During the late hours of Friday, August 7, 1992, and early hours of Saturday, August 8, 1992, Brown, along with his then-girlfriend Rachel Walker, cruised the Natchez, Mississippi region in search of drugs. During that time, Brown and Walker purchased and used crack cocaine multiple times. Brown parked his car next to the petrol pumps in the early hours of August 8 after turning into the parking lot of the Charter Food Store in Mississippi. Walker stayed in the car and watched Brown enter the store after filling up the tank. Walker saw Brown enter the business, take a quick look around, and then go up to the counter where the clerk and cash register were. She saw Martha Day, the counter clerk, grip Brown's chest, spin, and fall to the ground. Walker never saw Day again. Day was killed at around 2:45 a.m. during an alleged robbery, it was later discovered. She was shot 4 times, twice in the back, once in the head, and once through the heart. Walker saw Brown leave the store with many goods, including a cash register. Brown went back to the car and got into the front seat, where he put a revolver and the cash register. He allegedly said to Walker as soon as he got inside the car, "You better not move, and you better not say anything. If you love me, you won't say anything." Brown got the car started, and he and Walker drove into town. They were apprehended in a matter of days. Abdur Rahim Ambrose, 8 years on death row. Following the death of 31-year-old Robert Trosclair, Ambrose was found guilty of capital murder. The coroner stated that Trosclair was killed by beating, stabbing, and strangulation in 2013 during what the prosecutors called a 2-hour beatdown by Ambrose and 2 other people after Ambrose accused Trosclair of stealing stuff from his car. In court, prosecutors claimed there was no proof of any theft. Bobby Batiste, 14 years on death row. When Andreas Galanis, Bobby Batiste's roommate, discovered that Batiste was stealing from him, Batiste killed the college student. 3 Mississippi State University students lived together at the Ace 21 apartments in Starkville, Mississippi. Bobby Batiste, Andreas Galanis, and Jaywood Jew. 4 bedrooms plus a common area with a kitchen, living room, dining room, and laundry room were included in their apartment. Every renter had a key that allowed them to unlock both their individual bedroom door and the apartment's front door. Deputies Ford and West found Galanis' body inside a wheelbarrow covered in blankets on March 7, 2008. Warrants for searches of Batiste's apartment, car, and person were obtained. Once at the hospital, registered nurse Casey Hill gathered samples from Batiste's body and assembled a kit. Hill saw no wounds on Batiste, but there was a bloodstain on his leg. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.